it's often thought of as really complex doing new construction, doing subdivides, doing a lot of what we talk about, and really it's not. It's not. If you break it down into its pieces and parts and handle one step at a time, these things are not complex. Alrighty, welcome everybody. Dan Haberkos and Mason McDonald here today, and we're using real case examples as the basis of today's episode. So, Mason, how you doing?
Doing great, Dan. I think it'll be a fun episode for you to talk about what you're doing and what I'm talking about, what I'm doing, the good, the bad, the ugly, and the replicatable strategies that you can employ through these very specific examples that we're going to be talking through.
Absolutely. So, Mason and I just got off of somebody else's podcast, and we talked a lot about specific examples in our business and kind of did some deep dives. And we wanted to make an episode on our show out of this where, in my case, using new construction, in Mason's case, using Subdivide, walk through all the considerations and component parts of doing these sorts of projects, both what we thought about as we decided how to approach each, and then what we ultimately decided on and why, and how to put together a new build, in my case, and a subdivision in Mason's case. And so we'll start with my project, which was a duplex in Colorado, 3-bed, 2.5 bath, about 1,500 square foot aside duplex. That is just coming to completion, should have the certificate of occupancy here in the next week or two. And so we'll just dive right into it. So one more piece on that, or something I want to mention is it's often thought of as really complex doing new construction, doing subdivides, doing a lot of what we talk about, and really it's not. It's not. If you break it down into its pieces and parts and handle one step at a time, these things are not complex. And so that's the goal of this podcast. So what do you need? You don't have a lot of experience, you want to do a new construction project. Well, you're going to need to pick a market. You got to build it somewhere. You're going to need a contractor to build it. We're not talking about you going and becoming a general contractor. I'm certainly not. You're going to need the land within the market. You'll need the plans. What are you going to build? And then you'll need capital. You got to fund it somehow. And finally, what's the strategy? How are you going to profit off this? So those are the 6 components. And let's just start with market. So picking the right market is absolutely essential. I'm sitting here in San Diego, California. If you want to go build here, it takes a lot of time, a lot of capital, and a lot of headache. Now, you can make large sums of money, but I wouldn't recommend building somewhere like this if you're new. Pick somewhere where there are finished, shovel-ready lots, and where the regulation is more friendly to building. And
question on that, Dan, where I was at a conference last week and actually met a handful of people in San Diego, one of who is a builder that's been building there for decades and decades. If you live in one of these markets, that like a San Diego or a New York, or maybe not New York, a place where there's still land that you can potentially build on, but maybe it's more complex or more expensive, and you have the capital resources to do it, do you feel like you should stick to a market close to your backyard, or do you feel like you should look at kind of all of the zoning and planning and ease of permits to build, and potentially build, I guess, remotely or far away to get started?
I'm glad you asked. So if you have the capital resources, that's kind of the key to what you just said, then yeah, I think that's reasonable. But when we get to the general contractor, I would not want to do it unless I would want an expert. If I were going to build here today, I would want an expert whose incentives are totally aligned with mine on my team, driving towards the same direction. And so, yes, if you could afford to, buy the land, the plans, sustain for the year or two that it'll take to do the project, and San Diego really well, then maybe it does make sense. But when we get to general contractor and aligning incentives, I think that would be really, really key, because you just don't know what you don't know. And there's so many more overlays of regulation here. The Coastal Commission in California is not fun to deal with. So potentially.
Yeah, makes sense.
So anyways, as you're evaluating a market, you should also take into consideration, well, what do you know really well? Where do you have resources? So thank you for saying that, Mason. That's a great point. And where is it priced where you can get into the market? And so ultimately, for me, Pueblo West, Colorado was a great choice. I think I know every street in that market. I know a lot of people there. Very easy to get your plans done. Very easy to get a permit, and then the lots are shovel ready. There's water, sewer, power. I already own several extra lots there, right? So it fit all those factors. So again, if you're brand new, ideally, with some exception, but ideally you want to find somewhere like that. And there are markets like this all over the country where they're not a major metro, so the regulation isn't as difficult, and there's finished lots sitting all around. So ultimately, that's where I chose Pueblo West. One more thing to consider, there's lots of finished subdivisions sitting where there isn't a lot of demand. So you need to make sure that there's consumer demand, and we'll get into dispo strategy in a minute, but whether it's build to sell, build to rent, whatever you're planning to do, if it's a finished lot for $1,000 in the middle of nowhere where there's no demand, then that's not going to work. So, of course, there has to be consumer demand. Anything to add, Mason?
Yeah, I think consumer demand and end buyer financing for the product that you're planning on putting on the market, where if you're looking at doing a kind of spec build in Pueblo West, look at what the median income is, and don't necessarily go put a $2 million home on a lot that, might fit a $2 million home, and you might have the money to do it, but there's not going to be a buyer for it. So I think look at kind of the market demographics to understand who that end buyer is, not just the demand, but who actually is creating the demand, because you might think you're going to be the first mover of, I'm going to put semi-luxury in this market where every home is selling for $350,000, and I'm going to put a $900,000 house on it, and that might not work out.
That's funny you say that. I sold a lot on Quinto Drive to these guys in 2021. Had no idea what they were going to do with it, but I think it was the end of 2023, maybe the beginning of this year, I saw they had just finally sold it because it was like an $800,000 or $900,000 house. And it's just not a market for luxury buyers. It's very middle class. So that's a great example that's very appropriate because I've watched people do that. I can't imagine the interest they paid on that project. So, all right. So you found a market that there's demand in, there's lots that don't need a ton of work to get them ready, and where it's reasonable to get a permit. And from there, you need someone to build it. So let's talk about the contractor. So if you do this right, these projects can be mostly passive, minimal work, or they can be a massive thorn in your side and cost you hundreds of thousands of dollars. So this is hugely, hugely important. So I want to see contractors that have a lot of experience in that market. They aren't brand new, right? They didn't just come from out of town. Watch out for that. That have experience building the product I want to build, that aren't broke. And you can broach that topic very gently. So asking them about the draw process and how they're wanting to get paid, and you'll quickly be able to see, am I going to have to be on the phone when they're at Home Depot to pay for a $500 appliance with my credit card because they can't front that for a week, right? So these things are really, really important. Make sure that they're not broke.
Well, on that, Dan, what is a typical draw schedule that with the contractors that you enjoy working with? Like, what's kind of the standard of how often are you getting billed? What are the draws looking like? And I know we're going to be talking about capital, pretty soon on kind of how that works, potentially operating with a lender. But what's the typical schedule you see with these contractors?
So 1 to 2 a month generally, but this specific example we're just finishing, I got one right when we were breaking ground in April. I got one in May, one in July, and then one here at the beginning of September. and then I'm going to pay the last part of the general contractor fee once it's completed and we have the certificate of occupancy. So there will have been, I think there was 4 draws, and then just the final fee, right? And so that is more sporadic than normal. This contractor is in a strong financial position. It doesn't necessarily have to be like that. So if it's 1 to 2 a month, that's reasonable.
And what about their track record of, do you want someone where you're going to be the first house they've ever built, but they've got a good plan and got a lot of energy? Or do you want someone that is like an institutional builder or something like that? Or is it even worth approaching those huge builders? Like, where do you actually look to find these people, and kind of what's some of that criteria too?
Yeah, so that was one of the other points I want to make. I don't want someone who's brand new, but I don't think D.R. Horton or Richmond are going to build a spec or a rental for me where there's any sort of margin. So you have to look around for the mom and pop builders who are okay building with investors, because there's trade-offs with everything, right? And so I kind of think of a spectrum where, if you go to Sky Creek in Pueblo West, they'll quote you the absolute highest retail price. You would never get anything built at a discount, but they have a big customer service team and a lot of headache because they're building people's dream homes who are very emotional about this. And so there's a whole customer service and client management aspect that comes with that business model, but they sell at the highest prices. Whereas there are some builders who are happy to build for investors where they don't have to buy the land, they don't have to get the loan, they don't have to generally, and you'll lose their business quickly if you are a prima donna, but generally they don't have to deal with the customer service aspect of building someone's dream home. They're just building in my mind, basically a commodity. And so they're excited by that, right? And they'll take just a set fee to just build you that product as promised and not have to deal with it. And so you've got to find the contractors that are okay with that. You're probably going to have to call 5, 10, 15 of them. Many of them will say, no, I want to build for clients and that's fine. I'll buy the land, I'll get the loan, and I'm going to sell it at full retail. And then you will find some that are frustrated with building for that clientele and are happy to do a project where, I get to charge 40 or 50 grand, but then you'll have some upside because that's not even close to full retail. So you got to look around, and let me pause there though.
Yeah. So I guess within all of that, you want to find that kind of in between middle ground, that contractor meets all of those points. And typically you're working with fee builders, rather than someone that, and maybe you've done this before, especially when you were getting started. Have you worked with builders that, hey, I own the land, you bring the materials and labor, we'll establish a basis on, the land, we'll establish a basis on the house and all the costs associated with it. We'll split costs to a certain extent. And then you do a profit split at the end based on all of the costs, or is that something you typically avoid?
No, I think that's great. Speaking to aligning incentives, and if I was doing a project here in San Diego, that's probably how I would do it. And that's the way I actually learned to do this. The first projects I ever did, I learned through, my older buddy I've mentioned a million times. That's how he taught me to do it. He would work to sell the project. He'd bring the land and the loan, and then the builder would build it. Everyone would put everything in just at cost, right? Not mark anything up, and then they'd split the profit on the back end. So that can be a great strategy, and it clearly aligns incentives. Now, with this specific project, I'm keeping it as a rental property, so there's no profit to split. However, I did a set fee because a lot of contractors will do cost plus, meaning if it costs $1 million to build it, they'll then take a fee on top of that. I don't like that model because then it incentivizes them to make it more expensive. The more expensive it is, then the more they get paid. So great point, Mason. Yes, a profit split can be a great option if you're selling the project.
And what are those typical fees of whether cost plus or just a standard fee that they're charging?
So I have seen on the cost plus anywhere from 12 to 20%. So I don't know how that compares to the rest of the country. I've only built in Colorado. And then the fee on the duplex, it's a $50,000 fee. On the single families, it's a $30,000. 4 or 5 years ago, it was less than that. But of course, everything's gone up. And I will say paying this contractor more has been far more productive than the lower fee on the prior contractor who was much slower.
And that right there, I feel like it goes back to aligning incentives. And are there any, I guess, incentives or penalties associated with that 50K fee where it's like, hey, if you finish it quicker or go under budget or anything like that, they might get a bump up to some degree, or if it takes too long, they might get a penalty to some degree. And for that 50K fee, is that something paid at the beginning, or is that something paid over time as you're building?
So it's paid in thirds. 1/3 went upon groundbreaking, 1/3 was halfway through, and then the last third is after we get the certificate of occupancy. And I did not structure it that way, and I'll tell you why, but that is a great example. If you have less experience with the person, or you're not as, that can give them upside and incentive to get it done quicker where they get paid more, and then vice versa. So I think that's a great idea. However, this contractor had built this exact building several times, and a friend of mine had used them successfully, and so I didn't put that in. And so far so good, but that is a good idea. And to that end, make sure everything's on paper. If they want to do a handshake agreement, do not do that. Ask me how I know. Unlike Mason, who is very thorough and detailed, I am not, and I have done this on a handshake agreement. Don't do that. That's stupid. Make sure everything is clearly documented on paper, and there are contracts.
Awesome. Yeah, well, I feel like we've talked a good amount about the contractor, and I think that it makes sense because whether you're going vertical or using a contractor for a rehab, they are the person that can make or break you, and also a lot of the times the person that can steal money from you, as easy as possible, whether, the agreements are handshake or decent contracts and everything like that. So it's always try and make sure that you're paying for work that's been completed, rather than, a certain amount of work that needs to be done where, just like Dan said, of, hey, I can't pay my Home Depot bill. Can you pay it for me? And it's like, well, I don't know, maybe. And there's contractors where that does make sense, of you have it and you approve it and then you get the credit card points or something like that. Or, but in general, I think especially with your first time build, like the more professional, the less they need your money to, pay their employees, the less issues you're going to have with them, because if they can't pay their employees, the work's not going to be done. And you can kind of see how this, negative feedback loops ends up just costing you a bunch of money and a bunch of time. But, that's an important member of the team, but an important part of the project is the land. And I think with so many of our investors being land people, talk about the land that you're building on.
Yeah. So you can pick the right market, but if you don't pick the right lot, you can be in trouble. So Pueblo West is pretty easy. It's very flat, endless infill lots. Now, there's a section in the center that has water and sewer, and then, and actually that's not even worth talking about because the lots that don't have sewer are not zoned for duplex. So I'm doing a duplex. Among the duplex lots, they all have water and sewer, and this is pretty simple. The main considerations in that market are soil quality. If there's huge amount of shale, very, very, very hard, difficult to excavate and move rock, then that can make excavating very expensive. So had my GC dig around a little bit, make sure it looked good. And then also topography. Small slopes can be expensive to grade and bring in extra fill dirt and get nice foundation pad. So ideally a flat lot. But in other parts of the country, watch out for miscellaneous soil issues. You got to talk to experts there and figure out, do you need an actual soil scientist to go out and test it? Do you need a perk test done? Do you want to actually get the septic permit with the county before going to close on the land if it's in an area that requires septic, right? So look into what factors around the soil might come into play and, do your due diligence accordingly. I already mentioned topography, and then utility connections obviously are a big one. So ideally water, sewer, power, gas are all right there, but there are parts of the country where well and septic are very, very easy, but just make sure you know. And then something to watch out for is setbacks on the size of the building you want to build. So there's a lot of old subdivisions where the lots are too small now to really fit anything. Or maybe they're just barely big enough to fit an average plan and you want to build a bigger plan, right? I did an up-down duplex, or not up-down, side-by-side, but 2 levels is what I mean. a lot of the lots in Pueblo West, if I had done a ranch-style duplex, wouldn't have fit a ranch this size because, or 1,500-foot-a-side ranch, because the lots are pretty skinny. And so make sure that you're aware of the setbacks, the size of the building, and that the building actually fits. There are coverage requirements, right, where you can only cover so much of the lot. Again, you're doing all these line items in conjunction at the same time, and so you should be talking to your contractor and architect or designer while you're buying the lot to make sure that the plan you're going to build is going to fit on the lot. So ultimately, Harmony Drive, the one I chose, it's an oversized, flat duplex lot, great soil, surrounded by single family, even though it's duplex, killer views, great location, so that's why I chose it.
I think it makes a lot of sense, and I think you and I both have the idea of walk before you run, and there's plenty of lots that maybe, the zoning allows for a duplex, but any standard plan might not work for that lot, and I think whenever you're talking with the contractor that you're choosing, they're most of the time going to have a few housing plans that they already have that they would implement and that they would use, rather than having to go to the architect to get drawings, completed for a different type of house. And then, if they're used to building a certain way in a certain market by doing something creative because you got a small lot that doesn't quite make sense. And instead of doing a side-by-side duplex, you do a front-rear duplex and there's like weird entrances and all sorts of stuff like that. Then it goes back to who actually wants to buy it. If you're not doing a semi-custom home or something like that, just make sure it's okay to put the cookie cutter lot on, depending on what your disposition strategy is. So when you're doing your first build, don't try and get creative and create a solution for a piece of land that maybe no one else has been able to solve. So if it's your first build, don't think you're going to be the one that solves that problem by getting a creative, plan on a lot that you got for potentially an extreme discount. And it's the reason you got it for an extreme discount is because no one's going to end up being able to build on it.
Yeah, absolutely. So, all right, we talked about the lot. What about the plan? So we hit on that a little bit, but this is pretty straightforward. To our point earlier about building luxury in middle-class areas, what's in demand in the market? Where is there an imbalance between supply and demand? And then you also want to consider efficiency when building, right? Have your contractor and architect collaborate here to make sure your plan is designed in the most efficient way possible. So, my contractor had me switch foundation engineers because, honestly, to be totally honest, I don't actually know the nuance of the difference in the designs. I'm sure I could figure it out looking at the plans, but because their foundation engineer designs it in a much less expensive way, but it's still perfectly structurally sound, right? Is the plumbing, easy example, in a duplex, do you set it up so the bathrooms in each unit are up against the same wall, so all the plumbing can just run up right beneath them and then apply to both of them? Stuff like that can make it more efficient, cheaper to build without affecting the plan or affecting the value at all. And so really this is more a matter of the architect and contractor collaborating. So ultimately on this plan, the duplex plan I chose for several reasons. Number one, my contractor had just built it several times, and so the numbers were very accurate and up to date. They're comfortable with the plan. The subs were used to it. But also, concrete has gone up and up and up. Lumber has come way back down. And so to do a 3-bed, 2.5 bath, if I wanted to build out, it would be slightly better because a ranch would appeal to more people, older folks too. However, at the end of the day, the cost savings to go up, i.e. using more lumber and less concrete, were so substantial that I went up instead of out because it didn't devalue it substantially, and most renters are not going to be older folks anyways. So stuff like that is important to keep in mind. What commodities are high, what commodities are low, and then design your plan accordingly.
Well, on that with the plan of, I think there's certain desires that a lot of people have regardless of the house, and especially looking at the demographic, which Pueblo West is actually like a younger demographic than people might think it is. Do you have, because these are both 3-bed, 2-bath, 2-car garage, the duplex?
1-car garage, 2.5 bath.
And is there a master on the main floor or is it on the second floor?
Second floor.
second floor. So I think that's something that it's super common in Colorado, where the master is on the second floor. But there's a lot of markets in the country where the master is on the main floor. So don't necessarily be the one person that puts the master on the second floor if every other master on any property that you're looking at is on the main floor. And the easiest way to do that, hop on Zillow, look at what's selling, look at what's for sale, and get an idea of the product that's actually moving. Depending on whether or not you're renting it or selling it, you can look at all of these rentals and everything like that. And so once again, don't try to be the unique person. Follow the herd whenever it comes to doing a just standard spec build.
Yeah. Well, one more point I want to make, getting a little bit ahead of myself with dispo strategy here, but specifically we chose the 3-bed plan because a lot of contractors are doing these larger 2-bed, 2-bath duplexes, and they look great and they live great, but there's so much demand in the market for 3-bed rentals or even 4-bed rentals. And there are very, very few of them. And so that was part of why I really wanted to go the 3-bed route, and especially nice ones. There's a lack of nice inventory in this market. So that's ultimately what we went with. I think it's 1525 total finished square footage aside, 3-bed, 2.5 bath, 1-car garage. All right. Capital. You got your plans, the land, the market, the contractor. Well, you got to finance it. And I doubt most people listening have hundreds of thousands of dollars to do that themselves. So think of a spectrum. And this isn't perfect, but generally this is how it works. On the right side, you have the most expensive capital and the least amount of equity that you have to put on the deal. And then on the left side, you have the most equity and cash you have to bring to the table, but the least expensive capital. And so that would be usually local banks. And then on the right side, you have your hard money lenders, and then private lenders kind of are all over the spectrum. I mean, technically, private lending, you can work out any deal with anyone. So if you have a wealthy uncle or something, approach them first. But on the hard money side of things, I'll just put up the land. I'll buy that outright. I'll spend a few thousand on the plans, and that's it. And then the hard money lender will finance the whole thing. But there's expensive origination fees and higher interest. I think I pay 2.5 points on origination, and then I want to say 11% interest. And this is someone I've used many times, so that's actually a better deal than someone would get if they're newer. And then on the traditional bank side of things, the local bank, you're going to get, I want to say at the time it would have been 8-ish% and 1 or 1.5 points origination, but the land plus 20% down was, I think, the average quote I was getting, so a lot more cash. Also, one more consideration when choosing a lender is with those traditional banks, you're going to have a much more extensive draw process that's a pain in the butt. Whereas with the hard money lender, it's much simpler. Now, if you're new to this, the more extensive draw process might be a good thing, might help hold you and the contractor more accountable. But for what I'm doing and where I'm at, the hard money lender made it so much easier. So for me, and on Harmony Drive, I went with the hard money lender, so I didn't have to put as much cash in the deal. And also because those extra costs are ultimately getting amortized on a 30-year loan for a property that cash flows, so pretty negligible. So that was my choice, and those are the considerations.
What about going private? What would your conversation look like going back to whenever you first got started? And I know you were both intentional and fortunate enough to find a mentor that was able to take you under his wing, and he made you work for it. It wasn't like it was just like some, you got to come along for the ride. But how would you go about potentially approaching a private investor or a friend or a family member that might have the capital available to finance this project? But you also don't necessarily have the experience of this is your first home build. What does that look like? What do you need to do? How do you lay the groundwork or establish your track record or approach that?
Yeah, a lot of that would come from having a contractor with a track record, because if the contractor has built dozens, hundreds of projects and has a great reputation and is known for being, a solid player in the market, that can really help because ultimately they're the one building the project. So that's my first thought. Along with that, I would probably go the route of giving them equity in the deal as opposed to just an interest rate, right? So you don't have debt service. because of course I've been paying monthly interest on the construction loan, and I would put together a really solid presentation, whether you're assuming build to sell in this case, to present to this person with a clear outline of what they're going to get, how you're mitigating risk, why this contractor is reliable, experienced, and trustworthy, what the plan is, and why that's a good plan to be building, right? You need a solid presentation that shows you have done your due diligence on each and every part of the process that we're talking through today, from the land to the plans to the contractor to the market, so on and so forth. And then I would be pretty generous in what you're offering them when you're new.
Yeah, I agree with that. I think that's a great approach. I think ideally, if you can put skin in the game of maybe you're the one that bought the land and you own the land and you need someone to come in and do the financing on the actual construction, which is what the hard money lender wants too. Typically, they're not going to finance the land purchase in addition to the actual construction costs, and unless you've had that happen before. But I think also, which I think segues into our next part of this conversation, is around the disposition strategy of whenever you're talking to an investor, you're like, what if things, the investor question is always, what if things go wrong? What if it doesn't sell? What do we do? How am I going to get my money back? How's my money protected? And so being able to look at it of, okay, here's the various exit strategies that we have available within our tool belt, and this is what it would look like in this worst case scenario, middle case scenario, and best case scenario that can happen.
Yeah. Having a backup plan. Here's how I'll refinance and turn this into a rental and get you your cash back. Something like that. Great point. So let's finish off with dispo strategy. So considerations are both your personal needs and goals, and then the market. And so where is there a need in the market, right? We hit on this a little bit, but you got to build the product that is feasible for the most amount of buyers or renters, in my opinion, the most needed, the most reachable sort of product. Don't build the luxury rental property in a very lower middle class market, right? And then what are you trying to accomplish? Do you have plenty of income and need depreciation? Do you need to make more money, right? Take that into account and then align accordingly. So pretty simple here. My rationale, this market from the West is running out of water taps. It has very few nice rentals. It's interesting because there's decent demand from people with money with strong middle to upper middle class incomes, but there's not nice rental product. It is bad. There's a lot of slumlords, even though there's nice areas. And so on top of that, the Metro District, which is the governing body of Pueblo West specifically, you have the county building department, and then the Metro District overseeing Pueblo West specifically. They don't say it, and they don't make this overt, but they have effectively made it economically impossible to build multifamily, meaning in that market's definition, over 3 units. 3 or more units, and you need a whole sprinkler system. You have to meet all commercial codes. Suddenly getting a permit takes an obscene amount of time. Nobody does it because they have made it not viable. I think very intentionally, but of course they don't say that overtly. And so all that to say, there's a huge constraint on supply, and there's plenty of demand, and especially demand for nice 3-bed rentals. So it made for a great market for rentals. I have some other rentals there, and they're doing quite well. And I expect that to continue because even if the Metro District changes its tune, they're almost out of water, right? For anyone that's on the eastern side of the country, that might seem foreign because it's not as much of an issue. On the western side of the country, it's a huge issue. And they don't have many water taps left. They might solve this by buying more water rights from the Arkansas River, but that's expensive, and that will ultimately push up prices to develop and then push up prices for inventory in general, right? So I see it as a great buy and hold market. I wanted another building to do a cost seg on. So for me, I decided to build and keep. This would serve as a good build and sell model, but it just didn't necessarily make sense for me. And so that's the decision I made and why, and those are the considerations.
Yeah, I think it all makes a lot of sense, and it's a great way to kind of stack strategies onto the land business too, whether you are similar to Dan or Dan and myself, where we own these businesses where we turn and burn a lot of lots really quickly. But the reason there's so much value in the businesses we've created is because builders don't know how to do this. Builders don't know how to go out and find the land themselves. And I think that if you have the capital available and you can take some of the profits in your land business and be like, you know what, for every 10 lots that I sell, I'm going to take that capital and I'm going to put it into a new build where I can, buy the land at a discount and then work with a builder partner to potentially do either a fee build or do a profit split that's going to make it so where in the worst case scenario, I have this cash flow producing asset that I'm going to be able to capture depreciation on that's going to offset my land business. And it just, I think without overcomplicating the businesses that we're in, it is a logical progression of, I feel like, real estate investing. Of land is really nice because there's a good amount of simplicity to it. And there's actually a similar, limitation of complexity that's associated with going vertical on a new build. I've talked about it before on the podcast of the renovations on a 50, 60-year-old building that I'm doing that it makes me never want to do anything except turnkey rentals or build myself because it's way bigger of a pain in the butt to have to deal sometimes with major renovations rather than if I had just torn the freaking thing down and built from scratch again. But Dan, I think that was a great overview of what it takes to do a new build, and not just one new build, but two new builds essentially by doing a duplex. And I guess one question I have related to that, and maybe this is related to the city or the zoning and stuff like that. A lot of times you can buy half a duplex or one unit within a quadplex or fourplex or something like that. Is that an option for where you're building, or have you kind of ran into that at all or thought about that more?
I've seen a few people do these condo builds like you're describing. There's a couple areas where the lots are platted more accordingly. I haven't done that myself, but I do know that is feasible. And that market's not, Pueblo West is not unique. A lot of places allow for that. I just haven't done it myself.
Yeah. So that's just an additional disposition strategy, which makes sure it's feasible and allowed and everything, and it's structured that way because, you can, similar to just building two spec homes right next to each other, in some areas you can build, a duplex or a multi-unit property where it's set up as a condo and you have an HOA where there's shared maintenance agreements and stuff like that. Not trying to add more complexity to it, but it's an additional exit strategy you can have whenever you're building more than one unit.
Yeah, that's a great point. And so to summarize, guys, we should have the certificate of occupancy, which is what the building department gives you once all the construction's done, all their inspectors have gone through and said, yes, everything's done to code, HVAC, electric, etc. And this building is inhabitable. They give you that CO, and then it's a building. It's done, and you can go lease it out. So here are the approximate numbers because, again, I'm waiting on the refi. That's going to be the last thing that's up in the air. But total cost to build. So everything other than the cost I paid for the land and the plans, the land and the debt service was right at $420. And then I paid $20,000 for the lot. And then with interest and that, it should be right around $460 all in. So my contractor has sold this model at $586. I don't think it's going to appraise that high. I think they got lucky where they had 1031 buyers. I think it's going to appraise around $550 to $560. So call it, 90 to 100 to equity. Debt service should be $3,000-ish. Again, locked the interest rate, but still waiting on the appraisal and all the nuances of the refi to come to fruition. It's already rented at $2,050 each side, $4,100 total. So it's a new build. So there's actually cash flow in there. PITI is right around $1,000 or $3,000. Total rents are $4,100. I don't pay any utilities. They pay all the utilities. And there's about 90 to 100 grand to equity. I'll do a cost seg on it. It'll save me some money on taxes. It'll amortize, right? So this is a solid project added to the portfolio and continue slowly building net worth.
Absolutely. And it's something that you can build and sell right away and make, 70 grand or something like that after commissions and everything, or you could hold it and let it season and then sell it to an investor. You could build a bunch of these and sell it as a portfolio. I think one point, which I can't remember if you mentioned already, is whenever you're building these duplexes, make sure you do it right the first time and that things are separately metered. It's going to ideally simplify the utility bill unless you are having your tenant split it. I don't know if you have additional thoughts on that, Dan, on the separately metering and whether that's allowed or it ends up costing more than it's worth. But depending on the market, it's something to definitely consider.
So I did not do that with water and sewer because they were basically saying, oh, okay, you have to pay for a whole nother tap fee, which is like $36,000. So I didn't do that. However, one of our mutual friends mentioned to me that there's some new simple little sub-meter monitor you can put on or something to measure potentially. So I'm not familiar. Look that up, guys. That might be an option. What I'm doing is I just set it up with the tenants ahead of time. Hey, water and sewer, you're going to get a bill for 50% every month. So,
yeah.
If you can't do that, though, Mason, great point.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, perfect. I think they gave a pretty detailed overview of what it takes to do new construction and kind of how that model works. And we're going to extend this episode and make it long and go into the other side of the business of a deal that I'm actively working on that is just dirt. And it's just a land deal, and it's in the same area and same market to a certain extent. That's a consideration that we'll talk a little bit more about the specifics of the end buyer and the disposition strategy and that sort of thing. But the high-level plan for this property is it's 200 acres that I have under contract currently that we're splitting into 5 40-ish acre lots. The rationale behind doing a project like this is there's a good amount of buyers or a lot of buyers for these 35, 40 acre lots that are pretty close to a city, but there's not a lot of buyers that are looking for these huge tracts of land. And whenever you think about it from that standpoint, you're like, well, you're buying the land off market, you're getting it at a discount. You might be able to purchase these 200 acres similar to what these 40 acre lots are selling for. But the thing is, think about the end buyer once again. And many people don't want the responsibility of managing multiple hundreds of acres or anything like that. And just by doing a strategy within the business that's different than just buying land for cheap and selling it for more, which is so much the bread and butter of what Dan and I do, we're actually adding value with this product or project by creating a new product and creating new inventory that we're putting on the market. So I'll be able to kind of just dive in and go through kind of every step with this project, and it hasn't gone full cycle yet. But Dan, anything you want to add before I get started on kind of how we've gone about this?
Not really, other than conceptually, it's as simple as if I go buy a pack of waters from Costco, it's going to cost X per water. If I go buy one water at the gas station, it's going to be 10 or 20X per water. Same thing.
That's exactly it. So the way that we got this deal is I've been targeting larger tracts of land close to my house. I live in Colorado Springs. Colorado Springs is consistently considered one of the best places to live in the country. And one of the challenges with an area getting a ton of attention at the national level, because of the amenities that the city has, if you've got Garden of the Gods and Pikes Peak in your backyard, you're close to the ski resorts, it's a beautiful, beautiful place to live with great weather, is a lot of people want to move there. And so there's a lot of growth happening. And with a lot of growth happening, there's sometimes a little bit of flight that occurs from not the suburban flight that used to occur where people in the city moved out to the suburbs, but this flight from suburbia to the more rural communities where they're tired of traffic. You're sitting in traffic a lot longer than you used to in Colorado Springs. It's nothing compared to a Denver or a Houston or a Dallas or a New York or anything like that. But you're starting to see the changes. And me being here 4 years now, I'm noticing the differences of if I leave my house at the wrong time, it's going to take me a lot longer to get somewhere. And so these people that have been in this community for 20, 30, 40 years that used to say, oh, these used to all just be grass pastures out here, that's where they're moving. There's both anecdotal evidence that you can have just talking to locals and talking to local realtors and saying, hey, where are people wanting to move? And we keep hearing people want to move out east. And then you can see the data as well of, okay, I see that these 35, 40 acre tracts are moving pretty quickly in these markets. So there's verifiable transaction data. So I've been sending direct mail marketing campaigns and other targeted campaigns, whether cold calling, texting, emailing, and social media ads targeting landowners in the greater Colorado Springs or El Paso County area that own lots that are 70 plus acres. The reason that I target 70 or greater acres is because the zoning out here, whenever you have this A35 zoning, which is Ag 35, you're able to do pretty simple minor subdivisions or lot splits that the only requirement is having a surveyor come out and redraw the plat maps, which I'll get into the process of that in a little bit. But this particular deal was a direct mail campaign. I sent blank offers, which was a 3-page letter where the first page just introduced myself and my business and said, hey, this is what I'm looking for. This is who I am. This is why I'm looking for it. And I live out here, so I'm going to, I'm a local, sell to a local type of thing. And on the next 2 pages was a purchase and sale agreement where there was just a fill in the blank for name your price. I've had a lot of success on the marketing front using this type of letter because similar to the postcard or the neutral letter, you're not going to necessarily offend someone by pricing something too high or too low whenever you are compared to whenever you're sending a blind offer or a land offer letter. And I think that it just opens up the negotiation and conversation. So that was the marketing strategy that I used. The owners of this property live out in California. It's owned by a trust with a dad, a nephew, and a son. And it was the son that I primarily had the negotiations directly through. And they were looking to sell. They were super excited to, the dad was super excited to have received the letter. And it actually started off a little hostile, where the dad was really excited. And the son called me and he was like, people like you are always sending letters to my dad. And he gets excited. And no one ever, wants to buy or anything like that. Like, we know what our land is worth. We've talked to a realtor out there. If you can't meet our price, we're not going to be able to do anything. And so for the negotiations of the deal, I always try to make it a win-win scenario of, especially if there's a value add component where you're going to be able to force appreciation by doing some form of value add, like a subdivision. I asked, what did the realtor think that your property's worth? And they said it's $1,900 an acre. And I went and looked at the comps for similar properties of a similar size. And I found comps anywhere from $1,000 to $3,000 per acre. And so I sent them, of course, all of the $1,000 per acre, comps, and tried to show them, look, like, your property is going to be worth more if you split it down into smaller lots. Unfortunately, as is, it's not necessarily $1,900 an acre. But I'll give you $1,200 an acre. And then we went back and forth, and he said the family won't take anything less than $1,600 an acre. And long story short, we ended up at $1,615 an acre for a total purchase price of $323,000 for the 200 acres. This property right here it's a square, sort of. There's a couple lots that have been cut out over the years, but it's got power running along the road. It's got paved road on one side and dirt road on another, so it's directly off a paved road, which adds value out here rather than having to drive on dirt roads for a long period of time. So that's something else that I look for whenever I'm looking for these larger subdivision projects, is how close is power and how close is it to a paved road? Because the majority of the time, people are going to want to run electricity to their lot unless they're specifically and only using it for an agricultural use. And typically, if people are using it as their primary residence, a lot of times they have a preference of not having to drive for miles on dirt roads. So I'll pause there for a second, Dan, if you have anything you want to ask or add to this.
Yeah. I didn't realize you got it via the blank offer. I think that's really interesting, and the creative idea, especially on these larger tracts of land where pricing is a little more ambiguous and you're doing a value add. So more than anything, it's just getting these sellers on the phone that have these prime parcels, because when you're doing a subdivide, adding value, there's a lot more options, whether it's purchasing outright like you are or some sort of JV, seller financing, novation, right? There's lots of things you can do. And so I like that idea. I might actually steal that from you for some other markets. Other thoughts. So we're talking about market considerations, supply and demand. Where are people moving? What's the general sentiment? And if you look at the map and you look at Colorado Springs and out east, it would be hard from an outside perspective to know the extent of the demand out east because there isn't a lot trading. A lot of this stuff families sit on and have for generations. So can you talk a little bit about finding a local expert, how you know or knew there's demand, and more generally, if somebody wants to do this somewhere that they don't live, great if you can do it where you live, but if you're living in Manhattan, this isn't going to work. You want to go out of state to do this. How do you find this sort of qualitative data by talking to locals?
Yeah, absolutely. Because while I say that there's a demand for the product out there, since there's not a lot of inventory trading and there's some inventory that sits on the market for a really long time, the indicators are going to be a lot different than what we look for in our typical infill, lot land flip markets, where how many properties have sold in the last 90 to 180 days versus how many have come on the market. And just like you're saying, in these rural rural communities, there's multi-generational landowners out there. And so my strategy was find a multi-generational land-owning realtor in the area. And that's exactly what I did for this market. Of my realtor that I work with, his family has been, I think, in the eastern El Paso County, eastern Elbert County, for I think 5 or 6 generations now. So they know all the landowners out there. They're very aware of what the prices are. They have buyers in their network that are interested for the product. And there's evidence online of, okay, I can see that you've actually bought and sold land yourself. And that's how I found this realtor. Is I sent them one of these blank offer purchase and sale agreements for some of their land of 400 acres they own pretty close by. So, I pitched all this stuff and was like, hey, we could do a novation agreement. I could do the lot split for you. He's like, man, I've subdivided so many pieces of land, like it's not worth my time type of thing. And so got to know him, and he's sold some land for me already, and he's working with me on this project and several other projects I have going on out there. So similar to whether you're doing a suburban infill or city infill lot, you have to find the land agent that has actually bought and sold land. And then more specifically, especially in these rural communities, you need someone that's on your team, where there's a lot of people that don't want the big time developers or investors coming into these markets. And so they're going to give you the runaround, where you need to find this very specific person that is intelligent and business savvy. They want to make money and they understand the market, and their name goes a long way, where being able to work with this particular individual gives me a little bit more street credit. Where, out yesterday, we were out at the property and walking it, and there's cattle on the property. There's not supposed to be any cattle on this property. So there was a lease that expired 4 years ago that they were evicted, and going out with my agent, he knew how to handle this problem where I wouldn't have known what to do. Of, hey, there's cows on my property that shouldn't be there. I don't know what to do with them. And he said, okay, well, we're going to ask the neighbors first, which was my initial step. And the neighbor ended up, telling us whose cattle it was. And I actually had to just answer a phone call saying, they're going to get it off the land. But if we couldn't figure that out, there's a county brand manager that can read the brands and comes and, sends a notice and all this kind of stuff. So there's a lot of nuances within these markets, but having him and his name, just being able to talk to agents out there or talk to the neighbors out there, and him say, yeah, we've owned land out here for 100 years. And I went to this high school right down the road, and I know Johnny and this person, and that person. It's a little bit of a good old boy business out there. So I think finding that agent is crucial, and a crucial member of the team, which helps with the valuation process of it. So, going back, we got the property under contract for $323,000. And our next step, during our due diligence period is just figuring out, okay, how do we go about the actual subdivision of this land? It's a zoned A35, so I know what the process is, but who do I bring to the table and bring to the team to make it happen? And that team member is your surveyor. And one challenge in doing business in more rural markets, even if you're close to a city, is sometimes these specialized contractors, they have really long wait times before they can get in and make a project actually happen. So even though, the process on paper is, get a surveyor out there, have them redraw the plat map, create new APNs or legal descriptions, and record it with the county, which is going to give you new APNs. That sounds easy and should only take a week or two. But if the surveyor has a backlog for the next 9 months, it adds a lot of timeline issues to the project. And so we called a few different survey groups for surveyors that have done surveys on land that I have. Most survey companies offer this service of doing a minor subdivision or doing, creating a subdivision or drawing a new plat map. And one of the surveyor groups that we called, so this is a little bit different of a process than I think what most people experience and what I've dealt with in the past. They found that 24 years ago, they already did this for this property. So they found in their records a subdivision that they created in 2000, 4 or 5 40-acre lots, but it was just never recorded with the county. So if you don't have that luck where a plat map was already drawn 2 decades ago, the process, at least in this area, is typically about $10,000 to $20,000 to get that plat map drawn. So I'll pause there for a second, just see if you have any thoughts on where we're at with this project, Dan.
I think you've done a pretty good job breaking it down and determining how difficult or easy the subdivide is going to be ahead of time is really, really important and is a big part of why you chose this market. You also, it's amazing the things you find when you have the title company do a full title search and pull up all the recorded documents. A lot of times you can save yourself money, or on the flip side, find problems. In this case, Mason saved quite a bit of money. So do you want to hit on the financing aspect of this? If you're approaching subdivides, what are your options for financing in general, things to consider, and what you ultimately chose?
Yeah. So this is going to be a private deal with private investors of mine, where we're doing an equity split on the deal. And to jump ahead and then jump back to the kind of financing component of this, where the reason any investor is interested in this property is going back to what we were talking about with the disposition strategy, Dan, with your new construction. It's the same thing with this, where buy it for $323. We could probably sell it for about $375 to $400 just as is. Up to $2,000 an acre, probably just keeping the property, without splitting it or anything like that. So there's the instant equity that we get by purchasing it off market at a discount. But each lot, we're anticipating a sale price anywhere from $120,000 to $150,000. So there's ideally a total sale price on this of about $700,000 is what we're expecting for all 5 lots. So it's a double your money deal after costs and everything, which makes it really appealing to investors because there's not a lot of investments out there that you can double your money on. And I'm already doing all the work and, making everything happen. So the way I'm doing it is just a profit split, similar to what we do in our business of ground up fund, where we raise investor capital and then do a profit split with people that need the capital. I try to work with a lot of private investors myself to make sure that I always have access to funding, so we can't, we don't, ever have an issue with having our deals continue to flow. And one of the additional reasons that investors are so attracted to this particular deal is, these lots aren't finished. We would have to install well and septic for each of them. But in the area, there's comps for manufactured homes, 2,000 square foot on 35 to 40 acre lots that have well and septic, and just, not even new manufactured homes that are selling in the $700,000 to $900,000 range. Which is outrageous pricing in my mind for a lot of them, but there's comps that justify these prices. So where if we needed to, we could put manufactured housing on each of these lots and, potentially create anywhere from $150,000 to $350,000 in profit per sale based on the numbers we have for the manufactured housing. However, it depends. And, something I think about a lot within business and just life in general is just bird in hand versus 2 in the bush, where if I can double my money in 90 days, or I can quadruple my money in a year or so, it sometimes is better to just double your money right away. However, with that being said, there's the opportunity to sell a couple lots and build on a couple. There's the opportunity to sell some on terms or build and sell on terms of. we have a lot of different disposition strategies that we can do with this particular lot. And the nice thing about these lots and keeping them with that A35 zoning and the way that well permits work out here in El Paso County and in Colorado is these permits typically allow up to 3 residences on each lot. Not that you would, build 3 houses and, rent out each one. But I think that when I look at the market in general, and as I drive out to these properties, I see a lot of signs for new developments in the area where their marketing spiel is multi-generational housing, where it's a mom and a kid and a grandparent, parent, grandparent, and children all living in the same house or on the same property. So going back to end buyer of, hey, you can sell this vision of, look, you can come out here, you can put, multiple structures on the land and potentially have, an ADU or just a small manufactured house where grandma can live on the property as well. And you're able to run cattle and shoot your guns and have a lot of fun. And there's also the long-term hold aspect of it of, with this project, my goal is to try and exit as quickly as possible and, make the profit and put it into the next one. But as I do more of these projects out east, I think my intention will be of, say you're creating 10 lots, you have 400 acres or 350 acres, and you're splitting it into 1035s or 1040s or whatever. I would love to sell some, get the capital back, build on some, make some extra money, and ideally hold or retain one, because there is the strategy of land banking. And as you are in these markets where you see the path of progress moving, it's not the worst thing in the world to hold land, especially if the taxes are really, really, really low. I think a lot of us would be really happy if we owned land with a Colorado Springs address in 20 or 30 years, where the value of that property might be 100 to 200,000 today. But potentially in 20 to 30 years, it might be $500,000 or several million or $0, and that's part of the risk of it as well. And so I think that, this minor subdivision process, and it's not just El Paso County or Colorado where you're doing these larger ag-related splits. There's other areas where we did one in Maricopa County, Arizona, where it was a pretty similar process, simple to buy a 5-acre tract and split it into 4 1-point-some-odd acre tracts. Pretty easy there. But I think just with anything, just like Dan said, related to the market that you're doing business in, make sure that the process related to doing whatever your goal is as simple as possible if it is in alignment with your business. There's plenty of value that can be added or created by going into hard to work or complex markets and doing these subdivisions, whether major, minor, or somewhere in between. But if you're new to it and you haven't done one yet, I think picking one where it's really, really easy, buy a 20-acre, split into 2 10s and, sell them off individually, or out here in Colorado where, buy 70, split it into 2 35s. There's a tremendous amount of value that you can create by creating these smaller lots. And I think a lot of exit strategies that you can do, especially if you sell one and build on one, using some of the same strategies that Dan mentioned during his segment of this show today.
Yeah, a lot of good points there, Mason. So something I want to just emphasize and kind of follow up on is a lot of the value creation here is because the average consumer cannot buy the full even if they wanted all that land, they can't afford to put together the money to buy that whole tract. And so you're making land accessible to middle-class people by splitting it up into smaller pieces where then they can afford it. And to that end, one more potentially very profitable dispo strategy that further plays on making it feasible, making it reachable for people, would be selling these on terms. If you were capitalized accordingly, if it made sense for your business, you could sell these things on terms, be the bank, have a nice down payment, and then charge 10 to 12% interest. And that's just another potential dispo strategy where then for years and years, you essentially have mortgages paying you every month interest, not just on your capital, but also on the profit created as that profit comes in. And so, that when you actually do the numbers, often it's just astronomical in terms of returns because you're getting interest on value creation beyond your capital. So just another thought as far as how to dispo. And then one other thought I had is, because we've hopped around a little bit here, do you want to talk a little bit about, you mentioned the significance of 35 plus acres as far as subdividing, not needing any approvals. Can you talk about water and wells and why 35 acres is significant there?
Yeah. So whenever you are, splitting a lot and you have that ag designation, the permitting process to get a well is a lot more simple. These are related to laws that came into place back in 1972 in Colorado that changed kind of the subdividing process of it. But the assumption is if you have land that's zoned for agricultural use and it's maintaining a large scale and you're not using too much water, you don't have to worry about the transfer of water rights whenever you are purchasing these properties, because they're it's just not part of the process. Water is a scarce resource, and water is something that can make or break a deal in Colorado, where whether it's tap fees in a subdivision where they're all tied to these reservoirs and the number of shares that the city or local municipality or county owns, and they only have a certain allotted amount that they're able to grant out, which is what can stop development in certain areas. And Dan, we in a minute you could probably share a little bit more about the Pueblo West water tap situation that's going on out there and has been going on out there. But we had a deal that we had to kill where it was in I forget the name. It was Weld County, Colorado, but the water tap fees were only $3,000. But for each development, you had to buy one share of the Colorado Big Thompson Reservoir, which costs about $75,000 per share, which just made development unfeasible. And that's just something you don't have to worry about when you're doing these 35-acre lots, where ideally, assuming there's an aquifer beneath it, you might have to drill deeper. But I think it simplifies the permitting process. One thing to think about there, though, is look around and make sure that there's neighbors that have water as well. You can look on the Colorado Department of Water Resources or any state level water resource website to see where the permits are and see what the well depth is, to kind of give you an idea of what the cost would be to dig a well and put a pump in and everything out there, because you don't want to necessarily dig on dry land. But one last point on it before I pass back to you to talk about Pueblo West is whenever you are doing lot splits, even down to like an RR5 in El Paso County, which is rural residential 5 acres, where a lot of people are like, oh, it's zoned RR5, it's 35 acres, I'm going to split it into 7 lots. Whenever you're doing these types of lot splits, you have to do water feasibility studies on them. You have to make sure that the roads, are connecting to each lot and that they conform to the county regulations where, fire truck or EMT or something like that can come in and turn around on it. And it starts adding all these costs where this lot split, I got lucky, but if I didn't get lucky, it would have cost me $20,000 total to make it happen. A lot of these other ones of taking a 35 acre into 7.5 acres can cost anywhere in just soft costs $60,000 to $70,000, and then hard horizontal costs upwards of several $100,000. So you need to make sure it's in the right area and where there's demand for 5 acre lots in order to spend that much money on it.
Yeah, tons of really important points made there, and I'm glad you brought up the Weld County example, because there's 2 things. There is, you have to have water rights in general to create a sewer system, right? Or excuse me, a water service system, a water district, and then tap into it. Now, 35 plus acres in Colorado, or I think it's county by county, but I think it's generally 35 acres. By right, you can drill a well. Okay, great. But in Pueblo West, when I buy a lot and I say it has water and sewer service and I just have to pay the tap fee, well, the Metro District owns a bunch of water rights. It's an allocation that allows for a certain amount of usage. And so they only have a certain amount of taps allowable. And so, great, they hold the water rights, so I pay the fee, I can tap into it. But what Mason's describing in Weld County is, well, $3,000 for the tap fee, but there were no water rights to tap into, so he had to go buy the water rights if he wanted to do that project, right? And this is really important. So to kind of further explain the point, I watched a guy I know doing a big development project or horizontal development project in Pueblo City, where it was initially county. And so because it was county and not within the city, he could not tap in to Pueblo's water rights. Pueblo, not Pueblo West. So he went through a whole process with the city to annex that land into the city so he could just pay their tap fee and tap into their pool of water rights of the Arkansas River, right? Really, really important when dealing with land. So that was the main thing I wanted to add there. Oh, to your point, Pueblo West. So Pueblo West is separate from Pueblo. It just has that name attached to it because it's within the same county. And they are almost out of water rights. And so a couple years ago, they shut down all new water taps with no warning. And I was in the midst of a bunch of projects. I owned a lot of lots. This was scary because we didn't know, are they totally out? Are all my lots now worthless? Am I not going to be able to build or sell any of these? Well, in hindsight, months later, we got more information. They increased the cost. They reduced, they allocated a certain amount each year of taps to be used. Market slowed down because of interest rates, so they haven't run out yet, but they're more expensive. And unless Pueblo West, the Metro District, secures more water taps, more water rights, they are going to run out of taps. And then if you own lots there at that point, it doesn't matter if they have a water line. There's no water rights. So the lot would be essentially dry and worthless. Again, still doing business there, haven't run out. They might secure more water rights, but it really drives home that point. So, this isn't as much of a problem on the East Coast, but, if you're in California or Nevada or Utah, you might want to look into these subdivisions where, there's water service. Great. Well, are they almost out of water rights? Are you building on this now? Is this something you have to be aware of if you're going to hold this for 5 years? So worth looking into for sure.
Absolutely. And as we wrap up this show, I think that some of the main takeaways for those of you guys that have made it this far, that I think Dan and I would want to drive home is, since so many of our listeners are in the land business, you really, really, really need to understand your product and how to make sure it has the feasibility and possibility for its end use to be what it is intended to be. So if you're working an infill lot and you're buying it just to flip it to a builder, if you can't build on the land, it's not worth anything. So you need to have these standardized due diligence items that you need to know where the electric is coming from. You need to know where the water is coming from. You need to know where the wastewater is going. And if gas is a thing, how does gas work? And what's the access situation? And if it's zoned A35 for you to build a manufactured home and put a farm on it or something like that, is it something you can actually do? Or is it all in a wash or a floodway where cattle aren't going to be able to walk on it because there's too much slope? And there's so many considerations where I feel like so many people in the land business just look at the numbers and nothing else. You need to really understand your product. And that's why I think learning the process of how raw land turns into a finished home, you need to understand every process and every step within it in order to make yourself the most effective investor in land or land flipper or builder or anything, because there's so much value that's created with every step, where the land flipper provides value by being able to go and get land off market and provide it to builders at a discount. Builders are able to put something on the land, and developers are the ones that are taking the raw land and turning it into something that can eventually be built on. And so understand the product, understand that government regulations can make or break a project, and just make sure to keep learning constantly. But Dan, anything else you want to add or take us home?
No, I think that was a good summary there. A lot of information for the listeners today, but I hope that was useful, guys. We try and use as many real-world examples from what we're doing right now in our business as possible in this show. So if you find that useful, please let us know in the comments on wherever you're listening. Like, subscribe, give us a rating if you think we're doing a good job. But for now, Dan Habercost and Mason McDonald with the Big Picture Blueprint, signing off.